Friends, we've often said in this show that our context drives our behaviors. And when we look at multi-generation, we've said that what is it, the context in which they were operating in, what's the behavior that they bring at work, right? So if you think about someone in the baby boomer generation, and we see that there's a sense of loyalty at the workplace. Likewise, if you think about Generation X, there's also the view that perhaps they're seeking work-life balance. Similarly, for the millennial generation, they're the generation which was the first generation, which was very tech savvy and feel very dependent on technology. And so the context is extremely important for us because it drives the values and the behaviors that shape us. And when we think about Gen Zs, this is something that we have talked in the past, that their context fundamentally has been fundamentally very, very different, right? So when we look at the events that have shaped how they've grown, you think about things like the 9/11, 26/11, fake news, the Me Too movement. That's the generation which is born into the internet. And the corollary to that is that when you think about the context, what impact has had, they've also seen a full-fledged pandemic and now also a war. And so the corollary to that is, of course, we've seen a lot of news happening in the corporate world, people talking about mental health well-being, physical health being, and perhaps a case could be made to say that, okay, does that have an impact on our emotions? What does it do to our emotional health? And so what we're going to try and do today in our episode is to explore this whole concept of how do we maintain, can we actually understand how our emotions work? And putting aside not just the context, is that something that would be good for leaders, whether you're a young leader, an experienced leader, or someone as a middle manager? And to help us with that is my guest, Dr. Niloufer Aga. Niloufer, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nikhil. Happy to be here.
Excellent. And so, friends, as we've always done with each of our episodes, I'm going to quickly take a moment to introduce my guest. Dr. Niloufer Aga is based in Pune, India. She comes with more than 25 years of experience, both in education and corporate training. She has a postgraduate in instructional design and a PhD in sociology. She's a very experienced facilitator, works with several senior leaders, designing management development programs, training the trainer in the areas of team building, communication skills, influencing skills, and of course, emotional intelligence programs. For the past 15 years, Niloufer has worked as a facilitator and conducted more than 750 programs as a facilitator that accounts to close to 9,000 plus hours and almost 650 hours of coaching. And her specialty and area is also EI assessor, and as a practitioner, she's adept at interpreting assessment results and coaching. Some of the names that Niloufer has actually delivered for are clients like Atlas Copco, Pidilite Industries, CGI, Accenture, TBS, Honeywell, ICICI Prudential, BMC Software, Tata BP Solar, Vodafone, and even in her coaching practice, clients like Goodyear, Ratna Lifestyle, and so on. It's a very long list. One other thing that I want to mention is that Niloufer was also been awarded the NCERT Award for Innovative Teaching Techniques. She's co-authored a book called The Creative Teacher's Manual, which was published in the year 2012. In his spare time, Niloufer is a foodie and loves to travel. Niloufer, once again, it's a pleasure and great to have you. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Nikhil.
Lovely. So Niloufer, I have, of course, read and perhaps not done justice to the full bio that I could read for you, but is there anything that you want to add as a way to your background and the rich history that you have for our viewers?
So just one thing, all my certifications, so apart from being an EQ assessor, I'm certified in MBTI, certified in Strength Scope, and also certified in OPQ. Things like that, I find help me understanding human beings much better. And that is just one thing that I wanted to add.
Excellent. Well, I'm so happy you mentioned, because that's the focus of our talk today. So let's get right to it. Is to understand the human behavior and the emotions that drive us. So, Niloufer, a lot has been written about emotional intelligence. It's a buzzword. Everyone is talking about it. It's been there for quite some time. You hear it is the most common parlance in the corporate world today, and even in our personal lives. And even young children are talking about it, right? So there is enough out there, but Since you do a lot of work in the area, help us to demystify first as a way to kickstart our conversation. What is EI in simple terms? And second, why is there so much talk or traction about or a focus about EI both in the professional context and also in the work context? And my third part of the question, of course, is that what does all that mean for our young Gen Z, right? This is the generation which is just entering into the workforce. So first, help us to understand EI, why so much attention in the corporate world, and third, of course, what does it mean for the Gen Z?
Right. So we'll take one question at a time. So, in very, very simple terms, without getting into any technical jargon, EI is nothing but understanding the world, the inner world that we all have. So there is an outer world and there is an inner world. So we know a lot about what's happening outside. Very often we don't know what's happening inside us. So the awareness of what's happening to me with the various triggers that keep coming to me, day in and day out, every moment of my existence. And what do I do about those things? The second part is, what are others feeling and what do I do about that? So, it's a very beautiful combination of, self and others. So when we put this together, that is what EI is all about. So we have this, very nice model which was popularized by Daniel Goleman. And so maybe this is a good time we can share it with our audiences. And so what the model, again, in a very nice way, helps us to understand that there is the self and there is the others. So in the self aspect, how aware are we of, our own moods, our own emotions, what our triggers are, and how do they sort of play out when I am interacting with others. The other is, many times people are very self-aware. At the same time, they don't know how really to regulate their responses. And many times we find that very, very intelligent people also do several unintelligent actions, which later on, lead up to sort of a messy situation. And that is something that people do not pay attention to. So being self-aware as well as how to redirect those, disruptive impulses, or how to sort of, sometimes you need to tone down how the responses are going to be. So that is something that people fail to understand. So that is the self part. The other angle is the social awareness, which is, when I'm talking to somebody, when I'm interacting with somebody, do I really understand their emotional makeup and how, I should approach the situation, keeping the personality in mind. So that is the social awareness, and that is where the piece on empathy fits in. And then, of course, to be able to actually have a conversation, there are certain social skills. So it could be, conflict management thing. It could be, there are certain skills where you need to influence. There are certain skills where you need to be assertive. And the whole gamut of interpersonal skills sort of fits into this. So if we just look at the entire model, it's a very nicely put together quadrants are there where we look into our internal world and we also see what's happening with others and what we can do.
Excellent. So that was very helpful. And just as a simple way to understand, how it impacts us and how do we manage it, how it impacts others, and how do we use that to better our relationships. Now to the question of, why it matters in the corporate world, and then of course also for our Gen Zs.
Yeah. So like I said, being a combination of self mastery and interpersonal skills coming together. So what happens is, why is it important? Like, I said earlier that sometimes people act impulsively, right? And it's as if people are functioning on autopilot mode. So when they get triggered, they act in the most natural way that they know of, and many times they don't think of consequences. So very often I hear, the younger generation saying that, oh, I didn't agree with my boss on something, and so I just put in my papers. So sometimes that is what can come in the way. Just wanted to quote one more example. I was actually doing a session for a young group of people, and just people who had entered the workforce. And what had happened was that the first wave, the pandemic wave, had hit, and there was this young girl who was sitting in my session, and she was also, she had been appointed as a coordinator. So there were several phone calls that she was receiving, that now my family members got fever, so now should I come to work, or things of that nature, because there was so much of uncertainty at that time. Now, to begin with, I mean, I would have expected that the person steps out and receives those calls. She continued sitting over there. And, so different people trying to tell her, not to disturb the session, but, that self-awareness somewhere that she's disrupting a session was also not there. I think I would also like to give it to her that maybe she was so interested that she wanted to continue sitting there. At 5 around, we were sort of winding down the session, and suddenly she stood up, and she had a message in her cell phone to say that the government has implemented section 144, which entails that not more than 5 people can come together in a place. And that sort of overtook her so overwhelmingly that she just stood up and she made this big announcement, and everyone else sort of helped her to say that, okay, we can see that we're sort of winding down, so let's just wait for another 5-10 minutes and we'll all be out of here. So these sort of behaviors is what I'm referring to when I'm talking about the impulsive acts, and without really considering or without really filtering as to, okay, if I just sort of stand up and in the middle of a session, what could be the repercussions? Or if I just handed my papers just because in the heat of the moment, what could be the repercussions? So that is one very big reason why it is now taking so much of prominence in personal and corporate areas as well. So this is point number one. The second point is that very often there is a lack of connecting with people, and because the Gen Zs are so much on their devices, and they interact with people on their devices rather than face to face. So very often what happens is that when they actually do come face to face, sometimes there could be some sort of a lack of sensitivity to how others could be feeling. Sometimes I've seen them just sort of passing certain comments which they think is a joke, but it may not be taken too well by the other person, right? So and the social skills of how really to influence somebody, how really to negotiate a situation that is not going their way. So that is another reason why now corporates are really looking at how do we get people to learn those skills and come together so that they can work together. And that leads me to the third point, which is learning to work as a team. So I think the younger generation, the Gen Zs, are really great at working on their own. They're very quick on the uptake. They're smart. At the same time, to come together, work with different personality types, and work through differences of opinion is something that it seems to be an ongoing issue that corporates face. And that is the reason why corporates are now giving so much of importance to the education of emotional intelligence. And all these things, I think, play a big role in personal lives as well. I mean, impulsive acts, or, even in a family situation, you need to get along with your family members and have those conversations rather than just be on devices. So for these reasons, I think it's important.
Excellent. No, very good point, Niloufer. I think, look, we know that, you know, companies today rely on talent, and the war of talent, as they say, you know, talent has won. And if you're in a client-facing role, and even if you're not in a client-facing role, right, you cannot get anything done without working in teams and working with colleagues. And more and more you're seeing, whether you're based here or based in another part of the world, you're also going to deal with colleagues from, you know, other parts of the world. So at some point, you have to demonstrate what comes out also shows, and how you respond, as you said, becomes a way in which the team comes together and how the team members collaborate and so on. So good point. It kind of sets the tone about, you know, understanding why Gen Zs need to perhaps, you know, appreciate all of this much earlier in their career. We certainly talk about this at our senior colleagues. Now, Niloufer, the big question, and of course, you've explained the 4 quadrants very beautifully. So rather than going through each of them one by one, talk us through, you know, what are the ways in which we can build this EI muscle? I'm going to call just that rather than strategies, right? And generally, what can come in our way? Just help us through that, whether you're talking about young Gen Zs or even an experienced leader, right? Uh, you do a lot of work, right? How do we build and become better at it? And, you know, what can come in our way?
Yeah. So, you know, coming to the Gen Z, we can address that and then go more general. So, you know, that I want everything today is something, you know, wanting those quick results and having that impatience to sort of get that is what is, you know, coming in the way. So it's basically, you know, a process where a mind shift change needs to happen, where certain skill sets need to be sort of brought in, and all that can come only through practice, because otherwise all of us are sort of wired in a particular way. Our upbringing has been of a particular way, and we're conditioned to sort of maybe even get those quick results as we were growing up. And so what happens is that you know, that seems to continue, and that impatience at all points of time can come in the way. So to build a muscle, just like when we go to the gym, and you know, you have to work at making your building your abs or your muscles, it is a time consuming process. But at the same time, the more, you know, to the extent you sort of build it, you begin to understand why you are reacting in certain ways, why others are reacting in certain ways, and it, you know, the entire process becomes very, very satisfying. So what comes in the way is the lack of practice. So, you know, what happens very often is that just to give an example of, there was this young manager, and since I was talking about the rewiring part, you know, often the wiring starts from childhood. So there was this young manager who he was very, very smart, very brilliant, and climbed up the corporate ladder very fast. He was in the banking sector. And so while he was an individual contributor, what happened was that he was able to, you know, deliver results, and he worked hard, and he was almost a, you know, workaholic in one sense, and sort of as if trying to prove something. And so it so happened that at a point of time, he was sent by his senior manager to me for coaching, for emotional intelligence. And the manager's ask was that this person doesn't know really how to work with a team, how to, you know, validate efforts that the team is putting and stuff like that. So, you know, that coaching should be given to him. And so in our first interaction, I started asking him about, you know, who his role models are, what his achievements are. And so he had achieved a lot. And, you know, there was a very interesting story that he started telling. The story was, and I'll keep it brief. So the story was that, you know, they belonged to parents who were from the scientific background. And, you know, so their friends who came over, and parents' friends who came over, were, scientists. Parents wrote in science journals. So, they were like constantly surrounded by science. Now, there were two brothers, this boy and his younger brother. And so he was the elder one. And, as he grew up, parents used to speak that, okay, so our boys are also going to sort of follow that same sort of trajectory. And it so happened that this boy, as he sort of came to the 10th, and brilliant person, got, flying percentages, something like 98% and all. And parents were very happy. At the same time, this boy started realizing that he was not really interested in science. And now came sort of the, pressure of how do I tell this to my parents? And, so of course he looked for an opportunity and one day approached his mother, and mother, said, okay, let me speak to your father and stuff like that. And they finally sort of came to a conclusion that it's okay. He wants to pursue commerce. It's okay, let him pursue. Now, the thing is that as he had to, as he started pursuing that, understanding balance sheets and those aspects were quite difficult for him. And so he had to go for extra coaching sessions, in his college days. Now, there was one sort of a belief that played a very important role in the family. And, it was often spoken about that people who go for coaching are a little, less sort of capable. And as it is, this boy was, sort of struggling to prove to his parents that, he was a good son and that he would want to, do anything to get that validation from them. And so, first of all, there was this pressure that now he had to go for the coaching. And so anyway, he did that, but he excelled, he did very well. And, he passed out, he ran marathons, he did a whole lot of things just to sort of prove to himself and to others, especially the family members, how capable he was. Now that he joined the corporate sector, again, he worked very hard, climbed up the ranks. So all this was fine till he was, doing the work at an individual level. Then he came to a position where he was given 2-3 team members. And he had, sort of got into this groove of that, perfectionism, where nothing, no sort of error was tolerable. And so that is when, even if there were a few errors, say in a report that came to him, he actually used to, fling the papers on their faces, or actually tear the papers and dump them in the dustbin in front of those people. And that is when, the manager said, no, this is not. And people, his team members started saying that, put us in any other team. We don't want to work with a person like this.
Wow.
So that being the situation, he was sent for coaching. And then, of course, so once, as a coach, I started understanding that piece of wiring, what was really fueling that behavior. Then we sort of, helped him to become a little more aware of, first of all, that wiring, that, okay, this is what's happening to me. What are my triggers? Why do I get, so upset? And then why is it that I'm not able to communicate with people in a sort of a respectful manner, in an empathetic manner? So, again, if we look at, the 4 quadrants, to be aware, to regulate how you, speak with people, using your skills of influence, assertiveness, things like that. So those are elements that really helped him to sort of, regulate or moderate his, expressions. And sort of his manager said that he was sort of showing signs where he was getting much better at dealing with his team members. So coming back to this whole question of, what's coming in the way, unless these elements are practiced, unless, there are certain tools and exercises where we help people to become aware, to log their, triggers, to log their behavior patterns, to arrive at, understanding that what are my behavior patterns, and so that is the first step. And then of course, what are the skills that are required um, to overcome those disruptive behavior patterns. So that is something that requires a lot of patience, and many times uh, you know people don't have that patience, because that wanting those quick fixes and wanting quick solutions to whatever is happening.
Yeah, excellent. No, what a great story. I think because I'm sure this is not an exception. Maybe happening more often, perhaps, where we see the young Gen Zs either losing their cool, but I think the learning from that story, of course, was to appreciate and be self-aware. What is triggering the narrative that we all kind of carry with ourselves, right? And how do we become aware of that? It's not to say that every narrative is a wrong one and needs to be changed, but in that case, we heard how he was thinking, the childhood experiences, and of course that translated from school to work and so on. Now, one follow-up question there, Niloufer, which often comes the topic of EI, is that it's one thing to become self-aware, and let's say that someone is a little more self-aware, right? Or they're much more watchful. They're working towards, regulating their emotions and even in the social settings. But perhaps there could be a scenario, and I'm asking this just because, like in the corporate world, there are corporations where maybe you only get things done when you get into a ring or a shouting match or something, right? So in other words, I am aware that it doesn't make sense for me to be angry or lose my cool or anything like that, right? However, the environment in which I operate only gets to get things done if I get into a shouting match, right? So the case could be that, are you then suppressing your emotions, right? And how do you kind of deal with those kind of situations where that it's probably not prudent for me to raise my voice, but that's just the way things get done. So if I'm a manager and if I go from an environment which is very cordial, very collaborative, versus perhaps an environment where it's more execution focused, more profit driven, and it doesn't matter what you do but get it done, kind of a situation. So curious to know, what do you do there?
Yeah, so I think, see, first of all, I consider it as a myth that only work gets done only when you shout. So execution focus is fantastic. In fact, that's why everyone is there together in that workspace, so that we can achieve the goals. At the same time, is it really necessary to shout? Now the thing is that there are many in corporates also. I have heard, as I interact with different participants, I've heard that there are some leaders who show so much of maturity that they are able to get work done without shouting. Now the whole thing is that, again, first of all, if we are going back to that model, if we are aware that, okay, there is some behavior pattern of the other person that is sort of annoying me, maybe the person is not taking ownership, maybe that person is coming across as very casual, maybe they promised to submit some document by a particular timeline, but it did not come through. Whatever the situation may be, when if that is something that's triggering me as a leader, first of all, I need to understand that, okay, this is a trigger. All right. And so I sort of dive into my deeper world and acknowledge for myself that I'm getting triggered, and that temptation to sort of raise my voice or whatever is happening. Now the whole thing is, when we talk about self-regulation, there is something called as consequential thinking. So what is this? Consequential thinking just means that if I can pause for a minute and I can think of, okay, so if I shout, is it really going to make an impact? Many times it might backfire and say that, the other person might say, okay, go fly a kite. It may really not make the impact that I want. If I want people to be accountable, if I want them to be more focused, Just by shouting, I don't think, that impact would be created. At the same time, if I sort of calm myself, and if I use my, interpersonal skills, and I assertively have a conversation with that person. So shouting is only that, I feel shouting is only one way of venting, actually. But if you can have a, serious man-to-man conversation, woman-to-woman conversation, and let people also know what could be the impact of the behavior that they are displaying, and how that would affect the goals that they are trying to achieve. I think if that sort of a connection can be shown to people, people are, sensible. They actually understand. And I feel that would be a better way to deal with a situation of that kind rather than just shouting. And there are many, many leaders that I've heard of in different companies where they actually role model this, that work can be done without shouting. So
yeah, very good point. You're absolutely correct. There are stories where there may be a certain org culture that exists, but the leader himself has created the culture, his culture, the team culture that he operates in, right? And I think that's you perhaps exercise this even more rather than saying that the greater culture works this way, but I'm responsible for the culture that I am building, right?
correct.
So
Now, and many times what happens is that actually, these people who start shouting may get results in the short term, so, but that is it has a limited shelf life, right? After some time, people become so used to shouting that the shouting also ceases to have any impact.
yeah, very good point. Yeah. So, Niloufer, let's talk briefly about a couple more points. One is briefly, of course, you mentioned we're talking about the importance and how can we continue to build this. Are there some specific tools? And I know that there may be many things out there. Very briefly, like without going into any specific tool per se, like what do companies do to measure that over a period of time? That is one, just to see that has someone's EI improved. That's one. Second, is there some duration, perhaps, I don't know, can we call it like an average duration that in your experience with all this coaching that say that generally what you have seen is that there is a minimum amount of X number of months or weeks that has to go for someone to become aware, to become better, right? So two questions. What do companies do, and what's been your experience? How long or how short can that be?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that companies are doing is to organize a lot more of the training sessions so that people are exposed to the concept of emotional intelligence and also the tools and techniques that are involved in it. And for those who are really very serious about it, there are psychometric assessment tools which can indicate to a person what their level of emotional intelligence is on the different parameters, right? If we look at the model again, the different parameters are measured. So there is the pre-measurement, and then of course, after they have the participants who have been exposed to it, they practice enough. After a period of time, we can take a post measurement, and it shows where the needles are moving. At the same time, just having a 2-day workshop, would give a good exposure and sort of sensitize participants. To sort of add to the efficacy, what we do is also coaching. So, give concerted sort of and customized interaction with every individual, so that they talk about what really is triggering them, and how we can help them to regulate their responses, or bring in certain more social skills, or bring in the empathy aspect, things like that. So when we do that, we can see that actually over a period of 6 to 8 months at least, we require that much time because, like I said, we've lived our lives in a particular way, right?
Yeah.
And that wiring has sort of become our modality of behavior. So that rewiring process would take time, and with the touch points of every time we meet up with the coachee, the person refreshes the tools also, as well as they relook at their behavior from a more objective perspective, and that is what really helps.
Okay, excellent. Yep. So very good to know the tools as long as generally, as well as just the time frame. Now, the big question again, there comes, Niloufer, is that you could have undergone a session or a few sessions, and you come out on the other end becoming much more aware, and you're getting good feedback from your team, your customers are happy. But how does one sustain this EI muscle, if you will, right? In other words, we've all heard stories that, here was a guy who was so calm, and, I mean, look at him now, what has gotten into him, or someone who was, very angry all the time, and, we see he's mature, right? So the sustaining is more not just from a cultural aspect, but for leaders. In other words, should they be undergoing something like school periodically, or do you know of stories where, leaders kind of go up down, maybe as peaks and valleys as their career progresses, or does the curve generally tend to go in one direction? What have you seen?
No, I think the nature of human existence is to have the peaks and valleys, and that is what makes life interesting as well. So, and the same thing would happen, in a corporate setting as well, that there would be peaks and valleys. And like you said, yes, I have heard of instances where maybe there was a person, a high potential, who was, performing extremely well in a particular geography, for example. And then, so they get transferred to a different location, and for some reason they stop performing. So there are certain elements that would sort of affect a person while they are in the journey, and they would have to continuously monitor. So okay, so now I've been placed somewhere else. What's happening inside in my world? What are things that are actually affecting me? Why are they affecting? And okay, so if they are affecting me, what do I want to do about it? So these are some helpful questions. So, to, like you said, to bring in that sustenance. So there are two elements. One is where the individual themselves can sustain those practices. Like, for example, there is a very nice app where there's a free app available on Play Store, which I share with whichever groups I go with. It's called a mindfulness bell. So and Gen Zs like that because they are very app savvy people, and and the beauty of that app is you can program it whenever you want a reminder. And generally, what I say is 2 times in the day, if you can, in the work hours, right? Not just before sleeping and not just on waking up, but in the work hours when that gong goes, you just stop, pause for a few seconds to see, okay, what's happening to me at a body level, at a physical level. Is are my shoulders getting very tight? Are there butterflies in my stomach? What is happening at a physical level? What is happening to my emotions? Where are my thoughts just now? Are they in the future? Are they in the past? Or am I actually present to whatever I'm doing? So, that pause itself is a great exercise to come back to, what am I supposed to focus on, and what is the best thing I need to do at this point of time. So, currently there is a lot of, apart from emotional intelligence, mindfulness is another sort of buzzword. So these, work in tandem and help the person to come back. So very often a person can be sitting in front of the laptop but has got distracted because of some other pinging on the phone, or like Gen Zs are looking at 3 devices at the same time. So when the gong goes, that is a great way to just come back that, okay, let me relook at what was I supposed to be doing? Where is the mind wandered off? And, it just helps you to come back. So that is a great way to exercise the muscle. And these are things that I'm saying where the individual can do, and then I'll come to what the manager can do. So the second thing that individuals can do for themselves is, just create a log of in what situation was I triggered and what was the reaction that I gave. So if they can just a simple Excel sheet they can maintain over at least a period of 21 days to 30 days, they will arrive at patterns, and then they will, be able to see what sort of behaviors are they sort of displaying, and then if they want to take action about it, especially where the result has not been very fruitful, what is something that they would like to do about it. So that is another thing that people can do for themselves. What managers can do for them is, one is, of course, to first of all show them that, they respect the Gen Z and their choices, and then use, influencing techniques where, again, Gen Z has their own way of looking at role models, and they have their own influencers. So using those examples, how they can give them, not only the inspiration, but also give them feedback and influence them through their role models. The other very, very important thing is, I was just looking up some statistics where they say that 40% of Gen Z wants interaction with their supervisors to help them plan the priorities for the day. And, coaching and mentoring seems to be highly, highly rated. In fact, I know of several youngsters where at the, time of taking on the job itself, they put this in front of people that we would want somebody to mentor us. And many times, I think the Gen Z is quite frustrated at times when they don't get that, because everyone is so busy and no one seems to have time to mentor them or to coach them. And at the same time, they are constantly expecting output from them. So that is something that, companies and managers can definitely do. And there are some companies now like Sudarshan Chemicals, like Atlas Copco, like ACC Cement. They're really investing in creating in-house coaches and mentors. So, so that, they are available to these, the younger generation that is entering the workforce.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, no, I think you've shared some really good simple techniques or strategies, and it could be perhaps even relevant as you're undergoing some kind of a tool or an instrument to improve yourself. But even, having come on the other side, right? So mindfulness, something that we all hear, journaling that we all hear. You talked about some apps, which I think was a very good suggestion. The group, and of course the corporates are more and more trying to look for or build the bench of resources internally, right? Saying that, oh, okay, now that I'm in trouble, or now I sense some violent behavior or something very funny, let me go get a coach outside, from the outside. So this has been very good, Niloufer. Just a final thought as a way to close out, right? So if you are a young Gen Z listening to this, and if you're coming into the corporate world, right, ready to conquer and say, hey, here I am, what are the one or two tips that you'd like to give them when you think about just emotional intelligence as a whole, right? So first, just, what would you want to tell them? That's 1-2 tips there. And again, we're on the corporate side, right? You've discussed and shared many techniques and approaches and all of that. Again, you've got an incoming person and on a manager on this side, right? We know that the context of this generation is fundamentally very different, right? What can I do as a manager, right, to make it slightly better or easier for them? So 2 parts of the question. First, to understand, or maybe some tips for Gen Zs, and then second, of course, we go to the managers who are recruiting them.
Yeah. So for Gen Zs, what I would say is be aware of your strengths, believe in your strengths, because sometimes the fragility of a Gen Z also gets seen, where suddenly they get anxious, they get stressed, and mental well-being can be at stake. So rather than that, do a good SWOT analysis, be aware of your strengths, and believe in them, and have the patience. So very often it is important for us to go through certain experiences, learn from them, and have the patience to just see certain things through. And when you believe in yourself, what is also important is, slowly and steadily, when you overcome certain obstacles, you can validate yourself. Very often they are looking for validation outside. So you can pat yourselves on the back and say, wow, good job done. So that is something that I would ask the Gen Zs to really focus on, rather than actually relying on others for validation. And which brings us to the point that, as we go through life, we require two very good, two very important qualities. That is, one is to be optimistic, that yes, I will continue doing what I know, and I will keep learning, and I will keep overcoming whatever challenges. And the second is of being resilient, where oh, it's okay to, it's okay to fail, it's okay to slip, but let me sort of bounce back with double the vigor and rigor, and I can make it happen. So that is something that I would recommend. And the last thing that I want to say is that the whole thing of think before you speak, or think before you leap, again, that just keeping the impulsive sort of aspects in check. So these are things that I would give as a call to action for the Gen Z.
Sure. Excellent. No, very good point. And hopefully all our young Gen Zers are listening and sort of taking, as you say, be patient, be aware, have confidence, and life will throw curveballs at you, right? How do you kind of build and become resilient as well? So excellent. Thank you for that. Now, what about, just as a way to conclude, if I'm a hiring manager, if I'm a recruiting manager, right? We all create perceptions of certain generations in our mind. Oh, he's like this or she's like that. Just a word to the wise from to say that, look, I have to rely on these young folks who are going to help me, and because they will become kind of the mainstream cohort who are going to drive the values of the vision of the company in years to come, right? So anything from the corporate side, right? If I'm the manager, what are one or two things that I should be aware of when I look at emotions of the young incoming Gen Z?
I think what's really very important is for managers to, first of all, understand them as human beings. So it's apart, rather than categorizing them or labeling them. And I think the Gen Z, people have a lot to contribute. They are smart, they are aware, they are tech savvy. There's so much that they have, and they come with these hopes and dreams of making that difference. So I think to honor that, to validate that, to win their trust, to respect them for what they are, and then slowly, so I think, just like I'm saying, Gen Z need to have patience, managers also need to have patience with them, to recognize their strengths, and then slowly to sort of channelize those to achieving whatever goals the organization wants to achieve. So that is something. And then I think another thing that I would give as a sort of a must for every manager is invest time in them. Invest time, and it will give a lot of dividends. So that is two things, if we can do, I think it would be a good start.
Excellent. So there you have it, friends. Again, it's a topic where we can spend so much more time, but Niloufer, I think this has been one fabulous conversation where you've given us an overview of what AI is, why it's gaining so much traction, both in the corporate world, certainly, but even in our personal lives. How do companies kind of, help young managers or experienced managers to become better at it, right? What are some of the tools? How do we sustain some of these practices and just some techniques? So really enjoyed this conversation, and hopefully all our viewers and listeners are going to kind of pick up some techniques from this. So I thank you once again, Niloufer. Really enjoyed it, and I look forward to meeting you in person very, very soon. And take care.
Thanks, Nikhil. I enjoyed too.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.